So this particular session is, I remember that there are some applicants from non-economics, with non-economics background. Was there any? No. So all of them are from economics. Yeah. I know that you are specializing in various topics or subfields within economics or within development economics. So each and every lecture may not be as interesting as you would like to be because of your specializations and all. But I would try my best to sort of reach out to all of you, because this is something on which I think we at some point or other we have to reflect on some of these things. Even if your specialization is completely different, you may be interested in macroeconomic issues, you may be interested in foreign direct investment or something, but still this is something I believe that all of you would have some interest in this particular topic. And as you know that the recent years, in fact, we have had there's quite a few very important books have come out during this past couple of years. Stiglitz, The Price of Inequality, then Piketty, all of you know, Capital in the 21st Century, then came Atkinson, 2015, Inequality, What Can Be Done. That's also extremely, I would suggest that this particular book actually, sorry, this particular book, I would say that, as you know, that Atkinson is Piketty's teacher, and so Piketty published the book in 2014 and Atkinson's came out in 2015, and Atkinson has passed away after that. I think in 2017 he passed away. So this is, I would suggest that this is also a remarkable book. I mean, apart from, if you find the 700 pages of Piketty too much, but this also not very thin, but still it's almost half of the size of Piketty. So I would suggest that this book is, and then Milanovic, Global Inequality, a New Approach for the Age of Globalization, that's another one. So these, some of these books actually have made their mark, and this inequality, discussions on inequality, and all of them actually have been working in these areas for long. So these books are basically culmination of their research or accumulation of whatever they have done over the 30 or 40 years of their research career. So these are the, so I would suggest that if you are interested in inequality, then some of these things actually worth looking at. So that's why I find that today anyone who is doing anything in economics, development economics, may have some interest in inequality. Now, why it's not just matter of, I have gone through many of these PhD theses and also the young scholars publications as a reviewer of the journals, and I think the technical sophistication has been one of the hallmarks of these recent developments, that scholars, young scholars are extremely good at applying certain techniques and certain formula, certain standard indicators, and then doing the analysis in terms of econometrics and all. But sometimes what is missing from that increasing body of literature is that some of the very basic conceptual issues sometimes are confused, or maybe in some cases it's probably they haven't thought deep enough to understand the implications of some of these things. So that's the motivation. So that's why I thought that I'll go through quickly some of these things, so that you appreciate the depth of the understanding that we require in the context of measurement of inequality. I go back to this 1973 on economic inequality, Amartya Sen. And this is a classic kind of book. I'm sure that some of you have looked at this book, particularly first couple of chapters. And this is from On Economic Inequality. The idea of inequality is both very simple and very complex. At one level, it is the simplest of all ideas and has moved people with an immediate appeal hardly matched by any other concept. Think about Occupy Wall Street and we are 99% kind of. At another level, however, it is an exceedingly complex notion which makes statements of inequality highly problematic, and it has been therefore the subject of much research by philosophers, statisticians, political theorists, sociologists and economists. So, you see that it's not by economists alone. In fact, most of the measures that we talk about in economics, and particularly in welfare economics, a lot of people who specialize in this measurement business, and they draw heavily on the philosophers' writings. So, I will talk a little bit about some of these ideas which actually originally we got from some philosophers' writings, and then we turned into some measurable indicators or indices. Piketty also says similar things, like the history of inequality is shaped by the way economic, social and political actors view what is just and what is not. Now, so he brings in this idea of this what is just, what is not. So, not all inequalities are unjust, I mean we know that, as well as by the relative power of those actors and the collective choices that result. It is the joint product of all relevant actors combined. Now, since Piketty, both Piketty and Atkinson, they are very much interested to show why global inequality or inequalities in different countries came down for a while and then again went up since the 1970s and after that. But during the 50s and till the 60s, actually inequalities globally were coming down. During the two wars, in fact, inequalities were coming down. So, this kind of trajectory of inequality over a longer period of time, and Piketty is reflecting on that. So, on reflection, both Piketty and Atkinson, both of them in fact came up with this thing that it's not that something which is inhabitable in the sense that with development we have to have inequality or we have to tolerate certain degree of inequality with development. And Atkinson clearly shows that whenever inequality came down, if you look at the certain policies, you can clearly actually figure out how they are related. That means why inequality came down, you could actually find out some of the answers in the kind of policies that these countries actually undertook. So, that is Atkinson's position, and you may or may not agree with some of these positions, but nevertheless, I mean he is extremely a good scholar. So, he actually provided a lot of evidence on that. Some contrary views as well. For instance, macroeconomist Robert Lucas, I mean one of his papers, and this is a very provocative statement that Robert Lucas made. Of the tendencies that are harmful to sound economics, the most seductive and in my opinion the most poisonous is to focus on questions of distribution. The potential for you must have heard about Robert Lucas, right? Robert Lucas is famous macroeconomist, US macroeconomist. The potential for improving the lives of poor people by finding different ways of distributing current production is nothing compared to the apparent limitless potential of increasing production. Now, this is very straightforward and very provocative statement by Robert Lucas. The point is that so this goes on. But how does one actually look at inequality? I mean, when you are writing a paper on inequality, let us say, is it enough just to let us say you are comparing different countries or different states of India? Is it enough just to pick up one particular variable like income, let us say, and then go on measuring income and saying that okay, in this state inequality is more and in this case inequality is less. Now, is it good enough? Now, the point is that I would say that it is not, because when you compare states of affairs, when you compare states of affairs in different countries or different states of India, inequality is one of the dimensions. So it's not enough to say that inequality is more here and inequality is less here and full stop. Now that again goes back to Amartya Sen's on economic, and he's cautioning in this way. This is slightly complicated statement, but I'm sure that you would understand. It may be possible to argue that while distribution X is more unequal than Y according to some mean independent measure. Now I am coming to this mean independent measure. What it means by this? Since Y involves a lower mean income than X, maybe Y represents more real inequality. Now this is a very interesting statement, but people may be confused by that. Read it again. While distribution X is more unequal than Y, maybe Y represents more real inequality. What does it mean? He says that distribution X is more unequal, but at the end he is saying that maybe Y represents more real inequality. So what is this real? Or why is it that he is making this kind of statement? Now any clue? Any guess?
So there might be a difference in the kind of distribution in it. Like there may be a stark difference in the amount of income which people have.
Okay.
But overall, Y would be on an average much more unequal than X.
Okay. So you are bringing in the time dimension, that right? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll come to that later. Any other suggestion? You see that since Y involves a lower mean income than X, not really. I mean, in other words, I'm just trying to provoke you to think that when you think about inequality, do you really need to look at mean income or not? Yes or no? No? But Amartya Sen is saying yes.
So we should rather look at the mode of it. Like if we look at the mode, it would be the higher number of occurrence of the people in a particular sector. Like if you
Okay.
in different intervals.
Okay.
Per capita.
Hmm.
Yeah, but like for having a per capita, we cannot have it like look at if there are 100 people in a distribution, we cannot look at every person differently.
You see that
If we look at the mode, we can have the
usually per capita income doesn't come down, but let's say per capita income has come down, okay, and in the process inequality also has come down.
Sir, I believe in the case of Y distribution, where it is saying that it's representing the real scenario, maybe the people with lower level of income, they are more. Like maybe the gap is less, but those with lower level of income is more in number.
It's not that complicated, but I think that it's good that you have been thinking in yeah.
Country is poor, when the
Okay.
mean income may be less than a richer country, but the inequality may be more in the poor country.
Oh, then it's clear case. Poor country is bad because inequality is more, average income is low. Then it's clear case. But this is the complicated case where,
Why he is saying about the mean income, which is affected by outliers. So suppose I and you have like 1 lakh rupees, I have 1 rupees.
Okay.
So mean would be the suppose 50,000 something. But suppose if I have 90,000 rupees, I have 80,000 rupees. So mean is higher, inequality is lower. So he is
Okay.
trying to say.
Okay.
Mean is affected by outliers.
Mean is affected by outliers, but just read the statement again, that distribution X is clearly more unequal. So if you have outlier or something, okay, that would be reflected in your inequality measure, isn't it? If you have outliers,
Sir, is it something about nominal and real?
no. This is an even simpler idea. The idea is that when you talk about two distributions, have you heard about this, distributing poverty? Because the critique of inequality, most of the critiques of inequality, like Robert Lucas, would say that Redistribution is basically redistribution of poverty. Now, by redistributing poverty, you cannot improve people's lives. Now, that is one kind of idea, that if your mean income is too low and your inequality is also low, you really do not know how to judge that particular society. Now, whether mean income should trump over your inequality measure or not, you would never know. Let me give you, when I discuss non-income measures, inequality non-income space, that becomes even striking. I will give you some data from Indian, like for instance, if you just think about inequality in nutritional outcome, undernutrition, child undernutrition. So, inequality in child undernutrition, okay. Now, you will find that, the standard ways of measuring inequality in non-income dimensions, I will introduce that and then I will come back to this question. But just to sort of motivate you at this point, let me just, and this is our finding. The finding is that, can you believe that inequality in child undernutrition is more in Kerala than in Madhya Pradesh? Would you believe that? It is hard to believe, right? Inequality in child undernutrition is more in Kerala than in Madhya Pradesh. It's hard to believe. Why is it so? Because the way that we measure inequality, I'll come to that. Because when inequality is, in non-income dimension, when inequality is concentrated only at the lower bottom of the wealth quintiles, and everywhere else there is no undernutrition. Just think about it. In other quintiles, wealth quintiles, there is no undernutrition, only bottom quintile. Then the measured inequality will show high. But Madhya Pradesh, child undernutrition is all over. Then how do you judge Kerala and Madhya Pradesh? So, Kerala it's easy, you just focus on the bottom quintile, but in Madhya Pradesh you never know what would be the policy conclusion on that. And moreover, can you say that in Madhya Pradesh at least the inequality is less, so that is why it's slightly better than Kerala? No way, because average undernutrition is so high in Madhya Pradesh compared to Kerala. So, no value judgment actually would permit you to say that Madhya Pradesh is somewhat better compared to Kerala, at least on inequality in undernutrition. I would say that that's not an important value judgment at all. The fact that average undernutrition is high in Madhya Pradesh compared to Kerala, that itself is overwhelming. So, you see that in matters of judgment, which one would be overwhelming or which one would have overwhelming importance, that is a matter of judgment. Is the point clear? So, it is not just mechanically saying that here inequality is more and here inequality is less, that is why this is bad and this is good. No, it involves lot of this value judgment, reflections and value judgment to come to certain kind of conclusion. So, that is the thing which, as I said, that in many of these papers actually that is what is missing. In many cases you have tables after tables with all these inequality calculations like Gini or concentration index and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day actually interpretation is quite wrong, simply because you have not taken into account the multiplicity of this value judgment. Because inequality after all, it is a matter of value judgment. I will come to that. So, the second quote actually further clears this point. Yeah.
How that argument in case of undernutrition is similar to here where lower mean income is mentioned?
Yeah, lower mean income. So, what I am saying is that in case of lower mean income, if the mean income is too low, for instance, I will give you some other quotes from Drees and Sen also. I mean, they also, let me give you this, okay, this is from Drees and Sen and Uncertain Glory. You must have heard about this book, 2013 book. It is all about India in comparative perspective. Now, this is the kind of value judgment that they express in that book. What is it? The worst infringement of principles of equity. Of course, they are not talking about inequality, they are talking about equity, not equality, equity, principles of equity. I will come to that. the worst infringement of principles of equity in India is not so much the unseemly wealth of the rich or super rich. It's a very controversial kind of position. It doesn't matter whether you have, whether Ambanis have 1,000 crore more income in the next month. It doesn't matter. But the fact that so many people still lack the basic requirements of dignified living, etc., etc. In other words, here their concentration is entirely on this fulfillment of the basic needs, that is the dignified living. Now, if you don't have dignified living at all with the per capita kind of per capita income that you are talking about, then what is the use of measuring inequality in that? Do you see the point? You don't have Mukesh Ambani's. All you have is that 100% poor people. There may be some inequality among them, right? Some are closer to poverty line, some are far below the poverty line. Then what is the use of measuring that inequality? Because all of them are below poverty line. So I think this is the point that I think we have to recognize, that when you focus on the basic requirements of dignified living, then for the time being you set aside the issue that there is top 1%. But top 1% is important. Why important? So I am coming to that. Yeah.
The argument is like because a sizable proportion is under the poverty line, so inequality measure will not
reflect
the
that.
reflect the true picture.
Exactly. Exactly. Because poverty may be pretty low, inequality may be high. Poverty may be pretty high, but inequality is low. So all kinds of possibilities are there, isn't it? So in fact, the chances are that in many cases poverty is high, but inequality is low in many cases. Unless you have some super rich, otherwise poverty is low, but poverty is high, but inequality is also low. So that possibility is there. Now, how acceptable is that possibility? That's the point. So that's why they're repeatedly, I think they're alerting us, saying that give importance to inequality up to a certain extent. Like, of course, we should be worried about top 1%, but at the same time, if the basic requirements of dignified living are not fulfilled, then you better look at that before you talk about that. So that's the kind of argument I think we get again and again in different writings, even some time back. Okay, so anyway, so let me come back to what is. Anyway, so just motivation part actually takes more time, but I think it is important that we should get clarified on some of these things, and then I'll move fast. Okay, so now in the second quote actually he is slightly more clear on this, that to say that X involves less inequality than Y, even if meant to be a normative, will not imply an unqualified recommendation to choose X rather than Y. Exactly, this is the point that we have been laboring on. That is, just the fact that X involves less inequality than Y will not imply an unqualified recommendation to choose X rather than Y, but would presumably be combined with other considerations to arrive at an overall value judgment. Now, he is talking about this in a book which is on economic inequality. See that? So, he is entirely devoted the book on in economic inequality, but he is cautioning us, saying that inequality is just one kind of value judgment, and you combine it with other kinds of value judgments. So, just this point. The next point I think one should be clear about is that inequality actually has both descriptive and prescriptive issues. Okay. Now, some kind of description in terms of just statistical measure of inequality, think about coefficient of variation or Gini coefficient. Now, that's a description of inequality, but it doesn't actually automatically follow that you should have, I mean there must be some prescription which would flow out of that description, not automatically, as I said that. And so ideas of social justice influence both. Now, this is the most critical point. the ideas of social justice influence both. That means not only prescription but also description. So how does this idea of social justice actually influences your description as well? And that is what exactly what we are going to talk about, okay? Because description is not innocent. No description is innocent, okay? So even description actually could be colored by your underlying value judgment. The next point that I would emphasize is that inequality rankings are to be looked at as quasi-ranking, quasi-ordering. Now what is quasi-ordering? Now it's basically, what do you mean by inequality? I mean, when inequality is, let's say Gini is 0.34, you would like to sort of make comments that whether it is high or low. Now high low with respect to what? High low with respect to the standards, like other countries, okay? Now if you rank all these countries, then you will find that, you know, Brazil, India, China here, and maybe, you know, Norway, Sweden here. So something like that. So the purpose of measuring inequality is that you want to rank either countries or states of a country or something like that. But inequality rankings are quasi-orderings. What do you mean by that? They are not orderings, quasi-orderings, or sometimes we call it partial ordering. Have you come across this?
Every country cannot be compared with quasi-ordering. Like
Why?
every point cannot be compared. So if
Okay.
every point can be compared with each other, then it's
What is
not
the what is the technical definition of quasi-ordering? Any idea? Have you come across this in standard microeconomics? Your undergraduate first year microeconomics. What is ordering? No? Ordering? Yeah, please, yes?
If A is preferred to B and B is preferred to
That's transitive, yeah.
then it's complete.
Then complete and
reflexive.
reflexive, very good, yeah. So you have memorized all this. And now it's time to apply that. So an ordering is when it's reflexive, transitive and complete. Now reflexivity of, you know, weak preference relation, that is at least as good as that weak preference relation is reflexive, because A is at least as good as A. Transitive, you know, all of you know. And what is completeness? Mm-hmm.
Either they're
Right.
preferred equally or less or more.
Right. So pick any pair. You should be able to say whether A is at least as good as B or B is at least as good as A or both. Got it? That's in preference. But you can generalize that in any context. Take any binary relation, because we are talking about binary relations. The binary relation is the primitive, and from there actually gradually we move on to ordering. Now ordering is the most structured thing, binary relation is the primitive. So just think about any binary relation. A is son of B. A is son of B, is it transitive? No. A is son of B, B is son of C, that doesn't mean that A is son of C. So any binary relation doesn't follow these three, that, you know, doesn't satisfy all three. So some binary relations satisfy all three. If a binary relation satisfies all three, reflexive, transitive and complete, it is called an ordering. Got it? Now if it is reflexive and transitive but not complete, what does it mean? You said that, no? That two are not comparable or something. Right, right. So which means that completeness is violated, right? Completeness is violated. So if completeness is violated, it may be transitive, but completeness is violated. That means given 10 different countries, you may be able to say that, okay, A has more inequality than B, B has more inequality than C, but you may not be able to say that whether C has more inequality than D or not. Is it possible? Yes or no? If you believe only in Gini, it is not possible. Why? Because you can calculate Gini for all 10 countries, and Gini is a scalar number. So, scalar number can be ranked. So, no problem. So, if you have understood up to Gini, then you will never see this problem of incompleteness, isn't it? Huh? Gini makes it complete. Any ranking will be made complete by application of a standard index like Gini or coefficient of variation. You apply that, you get a scalar number, because basically what are we doing? We are actually comparing distributions, not any summary of the distributions. We are actually comparing distributions. One distribution X has more inequality than another distribution Y. Now, comparing distribution is much more complex than just comparing two scalar numbers. Now, two distributions can be compared in terms of just mean or median, or maybe second moment, third moment, fourth moment, but still you are not comparing two distributions in their entirety, right? So, Gini is just like that. Coefficient of variation is nothing but standard deviation divided by mean. So, it is a summary measure of the distribution, but not the distribution itself. So, in other words, any measure that we apply, it will definitely make it complete, but as I am saying, inequality rankings are inherently quasi ordering, meaning two countries may not be comparable in terms of inequality comparisons. Yes? By mean. So, it is a summary measure of the distribution, but not the distribution itself. So, in other words, any measure that we apply, it will definitely make it complete, but as I am saying, inequality rankings are inherently quasi ordering, meaning two countries may not be comparable in terms of inequality comparisons. Yes? Rising the distribution, that matters. That matters. So, that is why I am coming to this point. Yeah.
Inequality as a concept may not be complete, but if you want to quantify it by using any index, then it becomes complete.
Not necessarily so. I will come to that. Okay. So, once you appreciate this point, then actually you can look into all the inequality measures which make it complete or not complete, because now you have variety of measures and you can actually look into that. So, this is the point. This is a philosophical point. The point is that it is possible to argue that the implicit notion of inequality that we carry in our mind is in fact much less precise and may correspond to an incomplete quasi ordering. It is much less precise actually. When you say that a lot of inequality in Indian society, different people mean different things. Mm-hmm. Sure, exactly the same. But two distributions can be exactly same. Two distributions can be same in the sense of cumulative distribution function. That is another possibility, that each quantile of income you can compare and saying that each quantile actually, when you compare that, this actually lies above this. So, that is another way of complete dominance, all kinds of ways that you can compare the distribution functions. So, this is the point. The point is that the standard Lorentz curve all of you know, but Lorentz curve here you see that A implies less inequality than B on a wide variety of inequality measures. Now, if you have two distributions, if you plot them, they look like A and B, then you can clearly say that A has less inequality than B. Agreed? Visually? Yes, A has less inequality than B. So, in our undergraduate curriculum we have gone through all this, right? But the converse is not true. What is the converse? The converse is that by any measure of inequality, if you find that A has more inequality than B, that does not necessarily mean that A has more inequality than B, because it is specific to that particular measure of inequality, right. Now, when does it happen? Can you tell me? Now, in this particular case, no matter whether you use Gini or coefficient of variation, it does not matter. A has less inequality than B by most of the measures, but it may not be so. When? Your Gini is giving A, B, your coefficient of variation giving B, A. When? Any idea? No? No idea? When? Let us say you have 3 people, okay. So, I am just simplifying 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 4, okay. So, this is your geometric mean, right, and this is your arithmetic mean. So, we know the properties of geometric mean, arithmetic mean and all. But what is remarkable here is that very simple, that is, just for the timing you just forget the dividing by 3 and taking square root by 3, okay. Just do this exercise, okay. You increase the income of the poorest by 1, you get what? 36, got it? What do you get? Huh? 30? And 1/3 root of that will correspondingly be smaller than this, right? Agreed? What do you conclude from here? Geometric mean will give you, does it happen in case of arithmetic mean? This is 10. This is 10. It does not happen in our arithmetic mean, right? But it happens in case of geometric mean. What is the conclusion? Right? So, you see that you just by taking a generalized, so general mean is a just generalized form of that. In particular GM, when alpha is 0, you get geometric mean. So, geometric mean is just one instance of or one particular form of this entire generalized mean, right. So, take any value alpha, even 2, 3, 4, you get this kind of difference. That means, arithmetic mean will be insensitive to this particular value judgment. If the poorest person's income increases, it gives equal weightage to the total as when the richer person's income increases. So, that is why per capita GDP is not a good thing, but that does not necessarily mean that the other means are not a good thing. Got it? So, arithmetic mean is insensitive to that, but other means are not, geometric mean is not. So, this generalized mean could be a kind of income standard which actually embeds this value judgment into your income standard. It is not an inequality measure as such, but I can claim that geometric mean is sensitive to inequality in income. So, geometric mean is an income standard which is sensitive to inequality. Arithmetic mean is not. Got it? Now, if you just further extend it, go on extending it, you get a variety of other values, other issues here. There is another concept which is called Sen mean. Now, this again Amartya Sen actually introduced it long back. This is also a very simple idea. What is the idea? The idea is that you take any pair of incomes xi xj, note down the minimum. Note down the minimum. Take any pair, note down the minimum. Take any pair, note down the minimum. Add those minimums. For all the pairs, add those minimums. So because there is a issue of double counting, no? Because you take any pair, so AB and BA, so that's why you have to divide by n square. So 1 by n square, you take the double summation of that mean. So mean value of xi xj, got it? And that mean will be what? Equal to arithmetic mean? No, because you are always biased towards the minimum of the two, right? You are taking all the minimum of the two, which means that in aggregate it should be less than arithmetic mean. So how far it would be below the arithmetic mean, that depends on inequality. Because if it is perfectly equal situation, all the incomes are the same, your arithmetic mean or this will collapse to arithmetic mean. This will collapse to arithmetic mean, right? If all the incomes are the same. So since incomes are not the same, that's why Sen mean would be below your arithmetic mean, and that gives another kind of way of looking at inequality sensitive income standard. Got it? In fact, there is another standard way which again you can derive it from the formula for Gini and all, which is also widely used in the applied work. This is this, you must have come across this. So if Y is the per capita income, or Y bar is the per capita income, then if you just multiply it by 1 minus the inequality index, that is Gini index, you get what is called inequality adjusted per capita income. Inequality adjusted per capita income. So this is also another income standard. This is also another income standard. So mean is an income standard which is not sensitive to inequality. To make it sensitive to inequality, you multiply it by 1 minus G. If you just multiply by 1 minus G, it becomes inequality sensitive. In other words, if G goes up, there is nothing on per capita income, G goes up. So your inequality adjusted per capita income will come down. Got it? So this is another thing. Proper inequality measures. It's not that income standard. Now you understand the distinction between income standard and inequality measure, because income standard is talking about the whole income distribution, and inequality is actually one property of that distribution. That is, the first thing to be noticed is that this is basically standard deviation divided by mean. Why do you divide by mean? Why? Because standard deviation gives you the measure of dispersion, right? From the center, the dispersion, that is your standard deviation. But then why do you divide by mean? Any idea?
Relative to that particular distribution.
Two distributions have different means. Yeah. So if two distributions have different means, which means that the standard deviations would be actually influenced by that, the mean, because deviations will also be more. If the mean is high, then the deviations will also be more. So standard deviation actually, and also that standard deviation is origin and scale, you can, so that's the thing. So it's not scale independent. So to make it scale independent, that's the statistician's issue, that is, to make it scale independent, you divide by mean. But what is the But in the process actually you are doing something very, I would say, very deep intervention. What is it? It makes, when you divide by mean, the measure actually becomes what is called scale independent. Now scale independent or scale invariance is the property which is being satisfied. So scale invariance is a property which is often talked about in inequality literature. So what is scale invariance? It's a very simple idea. It says that if everybody's income increases by a certain percentage, then inequality remains unchanged. In other words, coefficient of variation satisfies scale invariance simply because you have divided by mean, that standard deviation is divided by mean. If you don't divide by mean, then it doesn't become scale invariance. So scale invariance is a property, so independent of mean income level. Now scale invariance is a very crucial property. You know why? Because just think about two individuals in a society. One person has income 100 rupees, another 10 rupees. So 10 and 100. So 10, 100. So that's the income distribution. So everybody's income increases by 10%. So everybody's income increases by 10%. Got it? New distribution. Now new distribution would be 11 and 110. Fine. What is the total increase in national income? It was, national income was this, and now national income is 120. Oh, sorry, 121. Yeah. So national income is 110 here, 121 here. What is the growth? Again 10%. So if everybody's income increases by 10%, national income will grow by 10% automatically by arithmetic. Fine. Now you are saying that inequality here is the same as inequality here. Now you may not find it very disturbing. No, it's maybe, yeah, because everybody's income has increased by 10%. Got it? Okay. Now let me put it in a slightly different way. Slightly different way. So because of economic reforms, national income has gone up by yeah, national income has increased by what? 11 rupees. 11 rupees. So let's assume that some intervention has taken place in the economy. So economic reforms. So after reform, GDP has grown by 10%. Now if I ask this, quite often we talk about fruits of growth, how fruits of growth are distributed. If I ask you this question, how have the fruits of growth been distributed? 21, this is 11, this person has got what? 1, this person has got 10. You see the point? Do you find it fair? No? Most of the people would say, no, this is not fair. This is not fair. We all work together to make 10% growth happen, but I am getting 1 rupees and you are getting 10 rupees. That is how the fruits of growth have been distributed. So in other words, it's not obvious that everybody would actually subscribe to this value judgment which is scale invariance. May not be. I don't. So in other words, any measure of inequality that satisfies scale invariance has a bias embedded towards this. That is, the absolute difference would go up, even though measured inequality has not gone up. Measured inequality measured by Gini or coefficient of variation, Gini coefficient remains unchanged, but the income gaps have increased tremendously. Now, do you agree with this or not? So, some people may agree, some people may not agree. Yes, you have a question.
10 and 100, that distribution is considered to be fair
Mm-hmm.
to begin with.
Okay.
Then if I am, then there has to be a reason that I'm earning 10 and my companion is earning 100.
That's a very good point.
So if 10 and 100 is fair, then I don't see the reason why 11 and 110 should be unfair.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Yes, I agree with you. I agree. So, here you have a value judgment that says that to start with, if you have accepted that 10 and 100 is a fair distribution, not fair, acceptable distribution, acceptable distribution. Okay? So, we always talk about tolerance, inequality tolerance. So, if that level of inequality is accepted, then why are you raising this question that the fruits of growth should be distributed in the same proportion? Okay, fine. So, that is another value judgment. So, in other words, ultimately I am not saying that this one is better or that one is better. What I am saying is that there are scopes to ask for, this basically deconstructing the underlying value judgment of any measure, and then only you can, I mean, some people say that, why do you have to do that? I mean, I can think of another measure which is or when it comes to non-income dimensions, okay, like for instance just literacy in 2 countries or 2 states in India, literacy. So, in one country literacy has increased, in one state literacy has increased from this, and in another it is let us say 70 to 77. So, all the time we compare that over time between 2 time points and 2 states of India. In one state it is 60 to 66, another 70 to 77. Literacy gap has increased or not? Or disparity, it is not gap, just disparity is a pretty general term. So, disparity in literacy between these 2 states, has it gone up or not? Yes, some people would say yes, but some people may not say yes. Why? Because if you follow her argument, in both cases actually it is a increase by 10%. 10% of percentage points basically. So, percentage points actually increase by 10% in both cases. So, in both cases it has gone up by 10%. So, if you just go by this increase as represented by percentage change, okay, it is the same. So, there could be a second value judgment saying that the increase, if you take improvement in terms of percentage change, well, it is fine. So, percentage change is acceptable, then inequality has not gone up. But some would say that no, the gap has increased, because 66 and 77 it is 11 percentage points difference, the 60 and 70 is 10 percentage point difference. So, gap has increased. So, in other words, what I am saying is that there could be an alternative value judgment which is sometimes called translation invariance. It is not my value judgment, I am talking about people's value judgment. Okay. So, that is why I ask all of you that what do you think acceptable, because ultimately the matter is that what is acceptable to people. Inequality cannot be just an expert's thing. Ultimately what is acceptable. Now, why is it that this Occupy Wall Street happened? I think You know, 99% of them never heard of Gini, right? So they didn't do their homework sitting at home and calculating Gini and then decided to come out on Wall Street. No, they thought that something is unjust, something is unfair, something is unjust, that it came out. So this unjust thing, what is unjust, what is acceptable, these things are extremely important in inequality measures. So that's the point that I am trying to make again and again. So what is the alternative? The alternative could be that translation invariance. What does it mean? Now this is another property that your index may satisfy this. What is it? It says that if everybody's income increases by certain constant, like 100 rupees. So if everybody's income increases by 100 rupees, then inequality should remain unchanged. If that is the property, now technically speaking, this is very simple idea. The idea is this, that you have y1, y2, etc. So if everybody's income increases by certain percentage, lambda times income, then inequality remains unchanged, which means that the inequality here and inequality here would be the same, right? If you multiply by a constant, inequality there and inequality there would be the same, okay? But the other thing would be that if everybody's income increases by certain constant, then sorry, it's not alpha. So if everybody's income increases by some constant alpha, then inequality remains unchanged. So this is another value judgment. This is called translation invariance. Now you can think of this value judgment also, that if your inequality formula satisfies this property rather than this, then you can immediately figure out that if gap increases, then inequality increases. Probably it would be even more disturbing, because 100 crore, 10% of that would be what? 10 crore. So 10 crore increase for Ambanis and 1 rupee increase for me, that may be, you may find it even more disturbing. In both cases 10%. Okay. So that's besides the point. What I'm saying is that just the bottom line is this, that there is nothing sacrosanct in accepting a scale invariance as the desirable property, even though scale invariance is embedded in both Gini coefficient and coefficient of variation. You see, it's a very crucial point. In fact, MIT's S. Subramanian, he has written a lot on this, and he actually calculated with national sample survey data and questioning basically scale invariance, and he is actually arguing in favor of this translation invariance or something in between. Now if you now you can generalize it further, that is an assumption which is something in between, you can call it intermediate invariance assumption or something. So scale invariance is one extreme, translation invariance is another extreme, and in between you can think of. Now in 1976, Sergei Combe, a French economist, he actually first introduced these differences, that 1976 unequal inequalities, yeah, the two parts, and there in fact he introduced this idea that Combe, K-O-L-M. This idea, the indices which actually satisfy scale invariance are somewhat conservative, and translation invariance somewhat progressive or less conservative. So he called it leftist and it's rightist. So between these leftist and rightist measures, there is a centrist measure. So there can be centrist or different centrist measures, just combining these two. Okay. So in other words, mathematically speaking, you can actually have a range of different indices which satisfy some form of centrist kind of assumption. Neither scale invariance nor translation invariance, but something in between. Okay. So as I said that it's independent and sensitive to income transfer. This is, I think, probably many of you know that if you transfer this is called progressive transfer. If you transfer some income from a richer person to a poorer person, relatively poorer person, it is called a progressive transfer. Okay. So this progressive transfer would reduce the value of inequality. Now coefficient of variation actually variation actually has this this property, but there is a problem. The problem is that it attaches equal weights at different levels. That means no matter whether you make the transfer here to here or here to here, it does not matter. So some people say that this is too insensitive. So if you make this transfer or more sensitive to this transfer rather than this transfer, same constant, then you use another formula, which is so coefficient of variation may not be. So the ideal formula might be this, that is so this the property of this standard deviation of logarithm is that it actually makes this transfer sensitive. So that is why this is another additional assumption. Transfer assumption actually is from Dalton, it is long back, but transfer sensitivity assumption is a somewhat new, and people have introduced that, and this formula actually satisfies the transfer sensitivity. That means one is that progressive transfer makes income inequality less, fine, that is your Dalton property or transfer, but progressive transfer here and progressive transfer here are no different in terms of this. But once you embed that into your formula, that is progressive transfer here is less important than progressive transfer here. If that is the case, then you use another formula which satisfies what is called transfer sensitivity, and transfer sensitivity is satisfied this formula. All right, just an interpretation of Gini. Now all of you probably have seen Gini numbers, or you have sometimes you have calculated Gini also. It's very simple, just arithmetic calculation, nothing more than that, if you have simple income figures like this. But if incomes are grouped classes, then you have some slightly modified formula and so on. But just the simple, so you have these yi's, okay, and y1 is the richest person, and then so it's a descending order. Okay, why is it important? I'll come to that. So just take it as a descending order. Y1 is the richest person and yn is the poorest person. Now these two formulas are equivalent. Look at the first one. What does it say? Basically you are taking the difference first. Difference of what? Difference of any two income, y and j. Difference of any two income. Remember, coefficient of variation was what? Deviation from mean income. But here you are not taking deviation from mean income. You are actually taking the difference of every pair of income. Now again there is a problem of double counting, so that is why you have this n square. So double summation and then divide by 2n square mu. Now this is the original formula, and you can show that this is equivalent to this. After some manipulation you can show this. Now this is very interesting. What is this? You see that the incomes here come, basically this is sum of income, but it is not simple sum. It's called, it's not simple sum, right? It's weighted sum. Weighted sum, right? So this is weighted sum, and weights are following a certain pattern. What is it? Right. So more weight is given to the poorer person. So in other words, some kind of welfare function is embedded here in Gini, which actually looks at aggregate income, not in aggregate as a simple sum, but as a weighted sum, where weights are proportional to the ranking. So this is basically what is called rank order weights. Rank order weights. That means in the income distribution, if there are n persons, So the richest person doesn't get any rank. So this is rank 1, rank 2, rank 3, something like that. So if you just multiply the income with the corresponding rank in the distribution, you get a sum which is a weighted sum of income. Now how do you interpret this? Now this is quite good, no? This is quite acceptable, that it says that it is sensitive to this. But there is one issue. The issue is that they are just ranks. So if Yn is Mukesh Ambani and is you and me, so Mukesh Ambani is n, and in my case it is n minus 1, right? So in other words, these ranks actually are ranks. They are not sensitive to the actual, you know, the deviation of these different incomes, but that is reflected in, yeah. So anyway, so but the point here is that now because of this particular thing, that aggregation is done through ranks, so that's why Gini has a difficulty. The difficulty is that, you know, if you calculate Gini for Bihar and Gini for let's say, you know, erstwhile Bihar, okay. So you want to get some idea about Gini for erstwhile Bihar. So you calculate Gini for now Bihar and Gini for Jharkhand, okay. What do you think that Gini for total Bihar would be like? Let's say this is 0.34 and this is 0.39. Would it be somewhere between 34 and 39? Yes or no? Let me put it again. For Bihar it is 34, for Jharkhand it is 39. Do you think that this united Bihar would be somewhere between these two? Usually we expect that, no? But for Gini it may not be. For Gini it may not be. So the group Ginis, so aggregate Gini is not something like weighted average of group Ginis. That is a problem with Gini. So that is why it is what is called, you know, it is not subgroup consistent. It is not subgroup consistent. So subgroup consistency is another property. That is why, you know, people use, when people decompose inequality, people use Thale measure rather than Gini, and Thale measure is subgroup consistent. That means you can get actually aggregate Gini just by subgroup Ginis with weighted average of subgroup Ginis. But Gini, some complicated formula people have come up with. So there is an interaction term. It is not just, you know, a group aggregation, but also an interaction term. But that is complicated. So that is why there is a way to sort of break it down into subgroups, but it is complicated, and so that is why it is preferred when you are talking about subgroups, then Thale measure is better compared to Gini. So Gini is not subgroup consistent. So subgroup consistency is a property which most of the inequality measures are supposed to or are expected to satisfy, but Gini unfortunately does not, but coefficient of variation does. Okay. So that is, other than that, there is no intuitive meaning as such, just like Gini. You see, the Gini is a very interesting idea, no? You see, the pairwise comparison. Now just think about it. Do you know the central tendency? Do you know the mean income? I don't know. I have no idea. But I can compare myself with my neighbor. I can compare my income with your income, my income with your income. So these are concrete incomes. But central tendency is not a concrete income as such, right? Nobody has mean income. Mean is just the calculated thing. So people, I mean, mean is actually devised for the statecraft, because the state actually wants this figure, so that is why this mean. But individuals do not have any need for mean as such. When it comes to inequality, you compare yourself with your neighbor, you compare with yourself with another person, may not be with Ambani's, but you know, with some people of your reference group, something like that. So that is embedded here. That is basically you are comparing everyone's income with everyone else. comparing everyone's income with everyone's else. So that's very interesting idea, because most of the deviations earlier actually in statistics all from central tendency. The deviations were conceptualized as deviations from central tendency. Okay. The last one actually is Atkinson's index. Now Atkinson's index is somewhat different from all these other indices. You know, in what sense? There is a fundamental difference between the two. These other measures, Gini and coefficient of variation, they actually came from statistics. So they are basically statistical properties of the distribution. From there actually Gini and coefficient of variation, both of them. But Atkinson's measure is completely different. It came from welfare economics. What is the idea? The idea is this. This is also widely used, but you know, it has certain limitations. I will come to that. The basic idea is here. It is called equally distributed equivalent income. What is it? Equally distributed equivalent income is a very interesting idea, and just based on this idea, Atkinson developed his index. I just briefly describe that. Again, you see that there are two individuals. Okay. Now let me assume that, you know, there are two individuals, and welfare depends on their income. Social welfare depends on their income. So W is social welfare. Social welfare depends on individual's income. All right. So this is some social welfare. Let it put to make it clear. There are two individual society. This is social welfare. Now I do this exercise that now this society has some inequality. Okay. Now if people have inequality aversion, that means if people agree that inequality is bad, then you see that what is the mean? 55. So if people think that inequality is bad, then what would be social welfare if it is perfectly equal distribution of the mean? More or less? More, definitely. So it would be more. Do you get my point? So if the same income is equally distributed between the two, social welfare will be more if people have inequality aversion. Got it? If people don't care, it would be the same. But people have positive aversion towards inequality. If that is so, aversion is important in this construction. Okay. Now you do this exercise. If mean increases, social welfare increases. If mean increases, social welfare increases. So if 55 becomes 60, it further increases. So I do this exercise, I reduce it. I reduce it in such a way that both sides are equal. Got it? So let's say I reduce it in such a way that both sides are equal. So maybe it is 48 or something. Then both sides are equal. Got it? Maybe if 55 is higher, then definitely 48 would be lower. So how much lower? It will depend on the difference, right? So I do this exercise. First I reduce by 1 rupee, then 2 rupees, then 3 rupees, then finally I arrive at here, where both sides are equal. So that's why this definition. So what is this definition? Equally distributed equivalent income is that level of income which, if given to all households, would generate the same level of social welfare as the original income distribution. Got it? So it's that level of income, if given to all the households, would give you the social welfare exactly as before. Got it? So this is your XEDE. Now you have a measure of inequality. How? Yeah, you just take. Now you are sure that XEDE is less than the mean, right? So, XEDE is less than your mean. So, if you take the ratio of that, it would be what? It would be a fraction, huh? It would be a fraction. So, you just take 1 minus this would be your Atkinson inequality. This is just Atkinson index. Now, what is this? Now, you can figure out that if now this entire thing actually depends on what? Your social welfare function. Let me give you this. The entire thing depends on what kind of social welfare function that you are taking. If your social welfare function is just straight line, this would be the same. Just think about it. If social welfare is a concave function of x, then only your XEDE would be different from you. If it is straight line, it won't be, isn't it? So that's why
statistics suppose there are two countries with equal income distribution, but the one is like USA and one is Russia. Then the inequality will be different. According to Atkins, inequality come out to be different in both the countries, because the social welfare function will be different in both the countries.
No. The point here is that social welfare function actually it's a construct, right? So once you construct that, you apply to all the so that assumption you have to make, no? So Atkins has suggested a very simple social welfare function, that is this, that u is like this. This is x 1 minus to the power 1. Now this is isoelastic kind of function, no? So if you this has nice properties. I mean, if you just take the derivative of it and you find out the elasticity, it would be 1. So this is widely used function, and this is concave, this type of function. So Atkinson himself actually used this function. Now once you decide to use this function, then you can compare countries' inequality in that. Now with this function, it's easy to find out your XEDE. Now as soon as you find your XEDE, then you calculate Atkinson. Now have you come across this gender development index of UNDP? How many of you? Gender development index of UNDP, Human Development Report. Towards the end, they have this statistical appendix. You have HDI, you have GDI. Huh? Now GDI, do you know the formula for GDI? Okay. So that formula actually derived from this kind of function. This kind of function, it's easy to derive that. Just think about two genders. There are two genders. Oh, every time I have to go there. No. Just think about two genders. Okay. So basically, you look at the formula. Oh, yeah. So what is the total if this is for female and this is for male? Just gender development index I am constructing. Okay. Now what would be social welfare then? So this is actually right, this is your social welfare. But this so what is XEDE? Now XEDE, if it is given to both female and male the same, then social welfare would be the same. So by definition, isn't it? Got it? These two sides must be equal. These two sides must be equal. Just think about it. Female is, let's say, 50 and male is 60. Okay? So if both have 54, 54, then social welfare should be as before, if you are averse to inequality. Got it? These two sides must be equal by definition, because XED is defined in this way. If given to both, then social welfare would be the same as the original. Now it's easy to solve for XED, isn't it? How do you do that? It's X right. So XED is what? XF 1 minus epsilon plus XM 1 minus epsilon divided by 2, and then what? 1 over 1 minus epsilon, isn't it? So you can solve XEDE just by from this equation, isn't it? Now what is this? This is actually gender development index. So gender development index actually used that kind of concave kind of functional idea. This is XF to the power 1 minus epsilon plus XM to the power 1 minus epsilon. There are two genders, so by 2, 1 over 1 minus epsilon. And in a sense, this is also our generalized mean. Remember that generalized mean? I introduced generalized mean. So you see that generalized mean application is here through Atkinson's idea. So all are interconnected that way, in a sense. Now you can see that, isn't it? So this is nothing but gender development index formula. If X is XF is female achievement, XM is male achievement, then you can have an inequality sensitive aggregate like this, or average. This is inequality sensitive. Otherwise it would be XF plus XM by 2. It's not sensitive to inequality. But once you make it like this, then it is inequality sensitive. So countries which have differences between XF and XM, they would be punished by producing a lower number if you apply this. Got it? Okay. Yeah.
Why are Atkinson and Keene known as entropy indexes, and how does the entropy classes their value different?
Well, actually entropy is that's an idea from physics. It has nothing to do with inequality as such. But the formula actually Thiele used in inequality context, and it gives good results. So that's it. But intuitively, it's almost impossible to interpret that particular formula, because it actually entropy is actually in thermodynamics, no? So entropy actually increases as these differences in temperature actually high, then it's high entropy, then temperature, I mean heat actually flows from high to low, so that's the idea. That so entropy actually reverses that process. That is, more entropy means more difference between high and low temperatures. Okay, so heat flows from high temperature to low temperature. That's the dynamic. I mean, that's the thermodynamics kind of part of it. And Thiele actually borrowed that idea from thermodynamics and applied this. So the formula actually straight away he gave us in this way. That but he defined entropy in certain way, and from there actually the formula came up. So that's the history of entropy. But it's called entropy, but usually we say Thiele's measure. But in terms of income distribution, it's difficult to give meaning to that. Okay.
So if we see any other kind of inequality, there are different values of Atkinson also to get, or different e-values. So how would we interpret it?
Yeah, that's why like this, no? This is the one. Now you can say that why do you take this particular formula? This is actually Atkinson's that utility function, that way, right? It's a particular concave function, and it is also isoelastic function. Now you can say that no, you can think about other concave functions also, may or may not be isoelastic, but the formula would be slightly complicated, difficult to understand, because ultimately you are constructing an index which should be comprehended by people and policymakers and all. So that's why GDI, So for GDI they use this because they found that Atkinson formula is simple that way, because that's it. But there is nothing sacrosanct about it. You can use other functions as well. Any concave function actually will do. Okay, now quickly some other issues. I mean, I said I had some numbers, but basically there are several other issues involved. That is from. Now let me briefly talk about. I think I am running out of time. From overall inequality to intergroup inequality. Okay. Now intergroup inequality sometimes it's I mean in Indian context actually it's considered to be very important. Now I just my co-author and I in a paper actually we just calculated very simple ideas. I mean it's not just very complicated inequality idea. It's basically from 2 rounds of India Human Development Survey. 2 rounds of India Human Development, and you know that in India Human Development Surveys actually, yeah, it's a large part of it is panel data. That means the same households were surveyed, and we adjusted for these prices and all for round 1 and round 2. Now just think about this. Now one idea could be that, so obviously this per capita income for different groups, you see that it is distributed like this. Okay, SC, ST, Muslim, something like that. Here you see that second round. Now if you look at this income growth, that means the average per capita income, how it grew between these time points, you could see that something like this is happening. So you see that SC actually had this highest growth, ST had the lowest growth. Now you might say that no, they are starting from different levels, so this percentage change or percentage growth is not the right thing to look at. Now if you do that, what do you expect on this column? In other words, since the base year numbers are different, then percentage growths are like that. Now if you take into account that the fact that base year numbers are different, then how should one adjust this? Should it go up or go down? So do you get my point? The point is that here 23,000 to 34,000, 52% increase, but 11,000 to 19,000 is 64% increase, right? Now you might say that this increase actually looks great because 11,000 to start with is much lower compared to 23 or 24, right? Right? Now there could be one way of correcting that, different ways of correcting that. So the level effect actually you can correct for that, but even after correcting, maybe SC's percentage change will not look as great as 64, but they are, to start with, they are high, right? So in the adjustment the relative positions would be like what? 64 would come down, 42 will further come down, 48 will further come down, because they are starting from lower if you do this adjustment. In other words, even if you do adjustment, 64 may come down to somewhere closer to 59 or 51 or 52, still SCs are doing much better, right? But how about STs? Because 42 will further come down if you make that adjustment. So in other words, the gap between STs and others would be even worse if you take into account the level effect. Now, this is from ISDS, okay, what the data show. So, you see that with just simple income growth between two time points between different groups actually can be revealing. But usually in the literature people do not look at these numbers. What people do actually is that there is a way that, as I said, that Theil measure in fact is used to decompose overall inequality into between group and within group components. That means, to what extent this overall inequality can be explained in terms of between group inequality and in terms of within group inequality. Okay? Now, most of the studies which have done this decomposition, starting from Sudhir Anand's famous book, that Poverty and Inequality in Malaysia 1980, that book actually he has done elaborately that in Malay society, Malays and Chinese, between these two groups, in fact they finally showed that between group inequality is not very high, within group inequality is high. But you will see that most of the studies after that on India, all of them show the same thing, that is between group inequality is not high, within group inequality is high. Now, it has nothing to do with this actual what is happening, it is entirely because of the way that we use our index, Theil index and decomposition, because all these decompositions are sensitive to the number of groups that you are considering and the group composition. For instance, if you have ST like 8% or ST like 80%, it will make a huge difference between within group and between group components. Ideally, it should not be, no, it should not be. They should be independent of group size, it should be independent of the number of groups as well. So, we did this calculation, you see that even just with simple thing, this Theil measure, you see that if one looks at this round 1 and round 2, it looks like that inequality has come down. Round 1 and round 2, inequality has come down. This is inequality between group. So, from there one can conclude that between group inequality has come down, correct? But look at the actual numbers, very small. As I said, that all these studies actually show that between group component is less than 10%, even less than 8%. So, from there actually they conclude that between group inequality is nothing to worry about, but focus on within group inequality, got it? Because the rest is within group inequality, because overall inequality is decomposed into. So, if I say that 5.6%, which means that 5.6% can be explained in terms of between group and the rest in terms of within group, okay? That is the interpretation of these numbers. But you see that how sensitive they are in terms of number of groups. As soon as you increase the number of groups, I did not change anything else, I just increased the number of groups. From 4 groups, now I am taking 6 groups. You see that immediately this between group inequality component increases. So, there is a kind of arbitrariness here. So, next time when you see any study published in EPW concluding that between group inequality is not so high, but within group inequality is very high, it is then immediately you say that this is because of Theil's decomposable measure, which has this property, that between group inequality will never show, will never go beyond, yeah, it will go. If you increase from 6 groups to n groups, make it n groups, which means that every individual is a group, then it is the same, right? Then overall inequality is nothing but group inequality. Right, every individual is a group, but in the limit. So, in other words, there is a problem here. The problem is that you make it 4 to 6, number will go up. You make it 6 to 8, 6 to 10, it further go up. Then you push to that, if there are 100 individuals, make it 100 groups. Each individual is a group, then 100% will be accounted for by group inequality. So it's so arbitrary. So that's why you see that this inequality decomposition exercise, you have to take with a pinch of salt, because it has this embedded characteristic of this formula, that between group inequality will always show very small, no matter how large is the inequality. I have already shown it in terms of different things. Now there could be different ways of looking at between group inequality. Why do you actually go for that? Just think about this. So you can just apply your mind and come up with various other things. But I have seen that the PhD scholars mechanically, they calculate this Thiel index and decomposition without really knowing the consequences of that. But instead of that, of course it's not very fancy, but it's a very simple idea. What is the idea? The idea is that you take population share, you take income share, and take the ratio, income share versus population share. Now look at what is happening to income share and population share. Income share to population share for Muslims, it has come down. For SCs, increased. For ST, has come down. And Hindu others, slightly come down, but not much, 1.185, 1.17. Now this is a very easily understood kind of idea. That is, what is the income share of this particular population? Now if that share actually has come down in total income, right, that is something, the changes. So you are actually looking at the changes. I am not saying that good or bad. What I am saying is that you can capture the changes. Now interpretation is different, but what I am saying is that Thiel decomposition measure will not give you this kind of insight. But it's actually fancy, but it will not give you. I have almost used my time, but let me stop for a while, and so maybe I will take just 5 minutes to complete this. Kumar, so I am done, right? There will be a break, right? Tea break? No. Oh, and next session will be Indranil's. That is from 11. But he has 2 sessions, so yeah, he can manage. You have given me only 1 session, but anyway, so I can finish it now. But I will tell Indranil that I have taken some time from him. Okay, maybe lowest growth. Now you might say that no, they are starting from different levels, so this percentage change or percentage growth is not the right thing to look at. Now if you do that, what do you expect on this column? In other words, since the base year numbers are different, then percentage growths are like that. Now if you take into account that the fact that base year numbers are different, then how should one adjust this? Should it go up or go down? Do you get my point? The point is that here 23,000 to 34,000, 52% increase. But 11,000 to 19,000 is 64% increase, right? Now you might say that this increase actually looks great because 11,000 to start with is much lower compared to 23 or 24, right? Right? Now there could be one way of correcting that. Different ways of correcting that. So the level effect actually you can correct for that. But even after correcting, maybe SC's percentage change will not look as great as 64. But they are, to start with, they are high, right? So in the adjustment, the relative positions would be like what? 64 would come down, 42 will further come down, 48 will further come down, because they are starting from lower if you do this adjustment. In other words, even if you do adjustment, 64 may come down to somewhere closer to 59 or 51 or 52, still SCs are doing much better, right? But how about STs? Because 42 will further come down if you make that adjustment. So, in other words, the gap between STs and others would be even worse if you take into account the level effect. Now, this is from ISDS, okay, what the data show. So, you see that with just simple income growth between two time points between different groups actually can be revealing. But usually in the literature people do not look at these numbers. What people do actually is that there is a way that, as I said, that Thiel measure in fact is used to decompose overall inequality into between group and within group components. That means, to what extent this overall inequality can be explained in terms of between group inequality and in terms of within group inequality. Okay? Now, most of these studies which have done this decomposition, starting from Sudhir Anand's famous book, that Poverty and Inequality in Malaysia 1980. That book actually he has done elaborately, that in Malay society, Malays and Chinese, between these two groups, in fact they finally showed that between group inequality is not very high, within group inequality is high. But you will see that most of the studies after that on India, all of them show the same thing, that is between group inequality is not high, within group inequality is high. Now, it has nothing to do with this actual what is happening, it is entirely because of the way that we use our index, Thiel index and decomposition, because all these decompositions are sensitive to the number of groups that you are considering and the group composition. For instance, if you have ST like 8% or ST like 80%, it will make a huge difference between within group and between group components. Ideally, it should not be, no, it should not be. They should be independent of group size, it should be independent of the number of groups as well. So, we did this calculation, you see that even just with simple thing, this Thiel measure, you see that if one looks at this round 1 and round 2, it looks like that inequality has come down. Round 1 and round 2, inequality has come down. This is inequality between group. So, from there one can conclude that between group inequality has come down, correct? But look at the actual numbers, very small. As I said, that all these studies actually show that between group component is less than 10%, even less than 8%. So, from there actually they conclude that between group inequality is nothing to worry about, but focus on within group inequality, got it? Because the rest is within group inequality, because overall inequality is decomposed into. So, if I say that 5.6%, which means that 5.6% can be explained in terms of between group and the rest in terms of within group, okay? That is the interpretation of these numbers. But you see that how sensitive they are in terms of number of groups. As soon as you increase the number of groups, I did not change anything else, I just increased the number of groups. From 4 groups, now I am taking 6 groups. You see that immediately this between group inequality component increases. So, there is a kind of arbitrariness here. So, next time when you see any study published in EPW concluding that between group inequality is not so high, but within group inequality is very high, you say, then immediately you say that this is because of Thiel's decomposable measure, which has this property, that between group inequality will never show, will never go beyond, yeah, it will go if you increase from 6 groups to n groups, make it n groups, which means that every individual is a group, then it is the same, right? then overall inequality is nothing but group inequality, right? Every individual is a group, but in the limit. So in other words, there is a problem here. The problem is that you make it 4 to 6, number will go up. You make it 6 to 8, 6 to 10, further go up. Then you push to that, if there are 100 individuals, make it 100 groups. Each individual is a group. Then 100% will be accounted for by group inequality. So it's so arbitrary. So that's why you see that any of this inequality decomposition exercise, you have to take with a pinch of salt, because it has this embedded characteristic of this formula, that between group inequality will always show very small, no matter how large is the inequality. I have already shown it in terms of different things. Now there could be different ways of looking at between group inequality. Why do you actually go for that? Just think about this. So you can just apply your mind and come up with various other things. But I have seen that the PhD scholars mechanically, they calculate this Thiel index and decomposition without really knowing the consequences of that. But instead of that, of course it's not very fancy, it's a very simple idea. What is the idea? The idea is that you take population share, you take income share, and take the ratio, income share versus population share. Now look at what is happening to income share and population share. Income share to population share for Muslims, it has come down, for SCs increased, for ST has come down, and Hindu others slightly come down, but not much, 1.185, 1.17. Now this is a very easily understood kind of idea, that is, what is the income share of this particular population? Now if that share actually has come down in total income, right, that is something, the changes. So you are actually looking at the changes. I am not saying that good or bad, what I am saying is that you can capture the changes. Now interpretation is different, but what I am saying is that Thiel decomposition measure will not give you this kind of insight, but it's actually fancy, but it will not give you. I have almost used my time, but let me stop for a while, and so maybe I will take just 5 minutes to complete this. Kumar, so I am done, right? There will be a break, right? Tea break? No. Oh, and next session will be Indranil's. That is from 11. But he has 2 sessions, so yeah, he can manage. You have given me only 1 session, but anyway, so I can finish it now. But I will tell Indranil that I have taken some time from him. Okay, maybe dimensions. There are certain problems here, certain issues here. Again, people just routinely take the numbers, like maybe morbidity, mortality, or whatever, and then go on calculating this. What, Gini? No, it's not Gini. It's something else. It is called concentration index, concentration curve. Now concentration curve is slightly different from your Lorenz curve. Lorenz curve says what? It is the population share and income share, right? So bottom 10%, bottom 20% enjoying 8% of total income, okay, like that, right? So that's your Lorenz curve. Now concentration curve is something different. It's the population share ranked by income. It could be socio-economic, but ranked by income. What does it mean? Population share ranked by income. That means you rank the whole population, okay? So bottom 20% in terms of income is different from Lorenz, right? Lorenz actually it was just 20% of population, but here 20% of population ranked by income, and this is cumulative percentage of health. That means about the total health achievement, what percentage they share. About the total achievement on the of the total achievement, what percentage this bottom 20% according to income or wealth or whatever share. So that is the idea of a concentration curve, health concentration curve. It is very similar to Lorenz, but not exactly Lorenz. Okay. The other difference is that in case of Lorenz, for income, your Gini actually is 0 to 1, but concentration curve actually depending on where you lie, I mean concentration curve actually could be the other way around also. The entire curve could be above depending on your health variable, depending on your health variable. So if it is actual, let us say it is undernutrition. Now undernutrition, bottom 20% should have a higher share of undernutrition, right. So in that case your concentration curve would be like this. So that is why the concentration index value would be lying between -1 and +1 instead of 0 and 1. Got it? So if you say if you get any concentration index value which is -0.78, which means that it is like that variable. So concentration curve, this is the another difference between concentration and Lorenz curve. Okay. So I do not want to get into this, just I will show you some number. Now if you are interested, then what are the data sources on which you can apply your understanding, or you can play around with the data. One could be that for non-income dimensions, either National Sample Survey or National Family Health Survey, and so this is something that, for instance, one finds that, let us say I am thinking in terms of this rich poor difference in terms of what is called reported illness. Now reported illness is given in National Sample Survey. There are a couple of rounds, 3 rounds so far, where you get this reported illness. Now reported illness, if you look at that, this is what we get. Now the first thing to observe is that in general Kerala has very high reported illness, and Bihar is here, and all India is here. Now on this actually Amartya Sen also wrote a lot, and then several other people also wrote about that. So why this difference between Kerala and Bihar in terms of reported illness? You are familiar with these issues, right? But what is interesting is that if you look at this from poorest to richest, how does it behave? Right? Now this is another thing that, so not only that Kerala Bihar difference, but also if you just take this poorer to richest, poorest to richest, you will find that the richer people, richer people get, it is more likely that they report more illness. So that is why all these ideas about this reported illness, actually it is controversial and all, but there are ways, our researchers actually have made different ways to sort of make them comparable, make them meaningful, and all kinds of, that is research. So huge literature actually exists on that, but basically the issue is that to what extent the reported illness should be taken as something, and then you measure inequality according to reported illness, to what extent. So some people said that no, do not look at reported illness, but look at the percentage of people who reported illness and actually have gone for treatment. Now if reported illness is this and very low percentage actually has gone for treatment, then you have something to be worried about. So look at the inequality in that rather than just inequality in reported illness itself. So that could be another idea. So there are various ideas that one can try, and particularly this health context, actually it is pretty tricky that how you actually come up with this inequality. And at the beginning I gave you this example of nutrition, child undernutrition, and as I said that now you know concentration index. So concentration index actually it is a population by wealth or income. Now you can figure out that Kerala, Madhya Pradesh kind of difference. So, if you have this poorest to richest quintiles, all the undernutrition actually is concentrated in the poorest class in Kerala. Very few, but whatever is there, it is there. But the other classes actually very little. If that is the case, then by concentration index it will show high. Because by nature concentration index, it has to be according to income or wealth or some other socio-economic variable. So, if you do that, then your actual measured concentration index value would be high. But Madhya Pradesh, since it is all over, so that is why the inequality will also show low. Now, these are the contradictions, puzzles, paradoxes, all of these actually are there in inequality measurement. So, I had lot to say on other things, particularly inequality of opportunity measurement, but I think that I must stop here, and the basic conceptual things, clarification of that I think would be much more important than picking up more sophisticated tools, which you would, any case you will do that, your guides will tell you that to pick up more and more sophisticated tools, otherwise you do not get published. So, but the other thing is that if you do simple conceptual mistake, then again you do not get published. So, that is the other side of the story. So, it is not just sophisticated tool that would take you that level, but one should make a balance between the two. Anyway, thank you very much.